Welcome to the Compact Podcast. Today we'll discuss the Trump-Harris debate. I'll be the moderator and I will take one side as Sohrab and Geoff face off. No, not really, guys, but what did you make of the debate and the many reactions to it online?
Okay, I'll go in first. Um, we have a great piece by Ryan Zickgraf, very funny, sharp writer as always, and this piece is no different. And I think it more or less captures where I ended up by the end of the evening. I watched the whole thing for my sins. Don't worry if you didn't. Uh, it will grind away at your brain cells and reduce their total number. But his take is, which appears at compactmag.com under the headline Kamala Harris's hollow win. And it's basically that, okay, she unquestionably on points, she did a much better job. He was on the defensive for much of the time. So she was somehow able to present herself partially as a change candidate, even though she's part of an incumbent administration. We can go into some of Trump's big missteps, which resulted in the consensus that he lost the debate. So those are the reasons for the win in that headline, right? The headline is Kamala Harris's hollow debate win. So why is it hollow? I think it's just because she continued to fail to paint a policy picture. I didn't actually walk away from this getting any sort of a detailed account of how she's going to tackle immigration, which is one of the most important issues. She just sort of went back to the very flawed, what they call it, the new border security deal, which began as a bill in the Senate, which then was killed in part owing to Trump's opposition to it, and then was then resurrected as a executive order from President Biden, basically codifying the same measures. The problem with it, which I know we've talked about a bunch on this podcast and in the pages of compactmag.com, is that the bill kind of gives this authority to the president to shut down the border, which is completely superfluous. The president already enjoys broad statutory and constitutional authority to shut the border for any or no reason that he deems necessary. But he the security bill or executive order gives him this authority, gives him or her this authority, if average daily crossings go north of a certain trigger over a given period of time. It's 2,500. So theoretically, that means that if every day 2,499 new illegal crossings happen, the bill's sort of much vaunted shutdown provision is not triggered. And so you could have up to 900,000 newcomers annually without this bill doing anything about that. And that's why a lot of people objected to the bill. On the economy, as Ryan points out, she couldn't really lean on the good parts of Bidenism, the kind of industrial policy, the pro-union elements. It was more kind of mainly tax credit oriented things. $50,000 for entrepreneurs. Well, for a lot of people, entrepreneurship is just far outside their reach. A more generous child tax credit and so on. But on the other hand, why did she win? It's worth saying. She just came across as more normal. She came across as forward looking, while he was, he couldn't resist. Every time she baited him with the typical things that Trump can be baited with, he couldn't resist going there, right? And I think the worst of it for me was when he again went back to saying that he had won the 2020 election. Why was that an issue? Is because he was asked, you've now conceded that you lost the 2020 election, which he had. I believe a couple of weeks ago, not that long ago, he said, I lost it by a hair, which is implicitly a concession that he did in fact lose it. And then Here he said, no, I never said that. I definitely won. And I think she had her most lethal line against them by saying that, 81 million people voted to fire Donald Trump, and he clearly can't let it go. And so it helped to frame him as, a creature of the past 8 years' turmoil and his own obsessions, and the fact that he seems to be running for his own sake, less than for the country. Now, there's a hypocrisy in that because, of course, it's not like Kamala Harris doesn't like power or isn't running for her own sake either. But in public, that matters. So I'll stop there. I mean, I think she definitely, as Ryan says, prosecuted a strong case against him, and he couldn't resist falling into every single trap. However, whether that changes the broader dynamic of a race where people are worried about the economy and worried about immigration, I'm not sure. And so I'll stop there.
So I was struck by the difference in tone between the closing statements, where Trump really returned to his theme of American carnage, which was the theme of his 2016 inauguration speech, and he insisted, I believe, we are a nation in decline. They're laughing at us around the world. And Harris sort of, in contrast, attempted to channel, I guess, a kind of sunny kind of Clintonian and, Bill Clintonian sort of can-do spirit. And, I did think just her policy content, to the extent there was any, was striking in its Clintonianism. This stuff about tax credits, assistance for homeowners, very much this kind of, well, we can sort of tweak things here and there to, give some benefits to the middle class, and this emphasis on the middle class. And so it really was an attempt to, and I'd say, on that level, the debate was kind of weird. It felt like she was trying to resurrect this, again, this sort of Clintonian version of the Democratic Party, where you're insisting that you're not really radical because you're just endlessly talking about the middle class and talking about tax credits and things like that. And that part of the debate felt oddly like a throwback. And as Ryan argues in the piece Sohrab mentioned, in some ways what's notable about it is how much it sort of undersells the more dramatic and path-breaking elements of the Biden record, right? Which I suppose have to be downplayed for various reasons. One of which is that they were actually continuous with some of Trump's more unorthodox policy approaches, particularly when it came to trade, right, which came up briefly. And so, yeah, it felt like a kind of weird attempt to, disavow the more significant elements of the Biden administration's actual record in favor of kind of trying to resurrect a very safe and cautious kind of Clintonian vision, right? But then, what struck me for Trump was it felt, again, like he was reprising these themes. This American carnage, we're a nation in decline, they're laughing at us. This goes back to his 2016 pitch. But I would say that, that there is a difference because the emphasis, I would say, is more on, there was an element of, obviously the whole Make America Great Again message, right, was this kind of, it had a strong kind of optimistic current, right, of, we can really rebuild America. And in this, and so it had that kind of forward-looking dimension, right, despite also having this kind of, prophetic denunciation quality. But I'd say in this case, what you heard was a more kind of backward-looking version of those themes, where it was really just about, endlessly reiterating this idea that, not just that the economy was better, but that we had like the best economy in the history of the world, or whatever hyperbole. And, I think the thing that's sort of interesting to me is, so I think on that level, this is where Harris succeeded, even though I think, for my taste, her pitch was extremely tepid and sort of, largely substance free. She did manage to sound like she was projecting a better future to some extent, and thus was able to kind of define herself as and she said, like, I represent a different generation, right? So, and she did repeatedly, kind of snooker Trump into relitigating the past, kind of bitterly looking backwards, and complaining about his own lack of credit. And so I think she managed to force him to make it about him more than the country, and also force him to frame these themes in a backward looking way, right? Where it's not really about wanting to make America great so much as to get people to acknowledge how great the economy was under him, right? And to get people to recognize this as an achievement. And so I think that did kind of succeed in bringing out some of his worst and most kind of self-defeating tendencies. That said, I think there's an interesting question coming out of this debate, which is just that there clearly is a segment of the electorate for whom this kind of darker and more bitter perspective on the current state of the country is going to resonate, right? And so I think there's a significant segment of the electorate, and potentially influential, that will feel, okay, well, I've heard this kind of crap about tax credits and so on before. It sounds like the kind of thing politicians always say. Not very impressive, kind of cliched. And, this Trump pitch may not offer me anything particularly positive, but at least he's acknowledging the dire state of things. And so, I think the open question coming out of those is, like, clearly he didn't offer the most compelling version of his pitch, but nonetheless, if there's an important segment of people who just think things really suck, then having somebody who's willing to recognize that in a widely viewed primetime event, and not not bother with the kind of flim flam of kind of carefully calibrated Clintonian policy proposals. And I would note also this interesting reprise of the Elizabeth Warren line, "I have a plan," right? Which I think, it was kind of an interesting one to reprise because, for two reasons. One, first, Warren, obviously didn't really pan out as a candidate, and I think this line wasn't usually taken to be a particularly effective one. And two, I suppose, again, what's kind of interesting is that Warren, for all her flaws, did represent a push, towards a more fundamental rethinking of some of these kind of Clintonian nostrums within the Democratic Party, and had more, her plans, such as they were, were somewhat more ambitious than the ones that Harris was touting last night, which seemed, again, extremely kind of safe and cautious and focus grouped. So, I thought it was interesting to see that reprisal as well, because that reprise, because it didn't it didn't seem like it was a reprise of a particularly effective prior campaign line. But so anyway, it felt very the sort of positive side of the ledger in her speech in her presentation felt very politics as usual. Trump is never politics as usual. And so, as sort of chaotic and weird and self-obsessed as he came across, he still continues to represent a break from what people expect from the usual politicians. And Harris basically gave us something we've become already familiar with for decades.
One thing that struck me about the debate was that the character of Kamala Harris and the nature of her policies didn't seem to come into focus. That is uh, bad potentially for Harris, insofar as it remains possible for her to be defined by the Trump campaign through negative attacks. American voters, I think, still aren't entirely sure who she is or what she will stand for. Uh, as was reported by CNN this week, she answered an ACLU questionnaire in 2019, saying that she supported, uh, you know, gender affirming surgeries for transgender prisoners, including those in migrant detention. Just a whole kind of litany of kind of progressive, insane proposals. She's endorsed all those. She's since has either stopped talking about them or, and in some cases, uh, such as fracking, she has reversed her position. But it's very unclear how worthwhile her current words are, given that she has said directly opposite things in the past, and because she doesn't, communicate. Obviously, all politicians change their views. Mitt Romney went from attending Planned Parenthood fundraisers, or at least his wife cut a check for Planned Parenthood, to saying he was pro-life and severely conservative. Trump has had his own evolution on the abortion issue and others. Um, but with Harris, there is something more indistinct about her. She seems to just say uh, what is expedient in the moment without really going to uh, the effort that other candidates put in to appear before audiences and demonstrate a commitment. Maybe there's something here about the low church religious experience of conversion, where you stand up and give a testimony after you've converted, and uh, the distance you've traveled is actually to your credit, but you have to be able to persuasively communicate why you've shifted from one point to the other. And Harris, in part because she's had this uh, bunker media strategy, avoiding all live interviews, uh, where there could be a real give and take, I think has failed to persuade voters that her current views are deeply and sincerely held. Uh, so uh, that's a big issue in the debate. But this does represent a failed opportunity for Trump. I think he failed to depict her as dangerously liberal, and failed to tie her to the Biden administration, which is what he needs to do to win this race. I do think it's worth looking at a couple issues. I was actually quite struck by how well Trump did on the economy in the early portion of the debates. Uh, he defended his tariff policies quite well, uh, and surely that's the most novel element of the current Trump campaign. I mean, opinion has shifted in his direction a great deal on immigration. You have even seen, well, you've seen a great weakening in support for immigration in the pundit class. Yes, a lot of people are still reciting the old time religion of why we need open borders, but there's a huge lack of conviction on both the kind of free market right and the progressive left. People kind of see that things aren't working and something needs to change. Uh, they're unwilling to break with the insane rhetorical positions they've staked out, but I think there's a lack of faith on tariffs. There is more real resistance to Trump's proposal, and he defended himself pretty well. I thought Kamala's response was quite weak. This might just be me, but I was unmoved by her mention of professors at the Wharton School and Harvard, and the letter from the 60 Nobel laureates. You know, Trump read, eagerly countered by pointing out that he had gone to Wharton and he had great professors too, without managing to specify these wonderful professors he had on his side. But you're just saying, look, I have the experts on my side. Trust me. It just doesn't really connect for me. She failed. She failed to make the argument. She simply appealed to authority, and that's a weak form of argument. It's better to say, uh, "This is the correct understanding of the matter," instead of "This is what teacher says." So Kamala was quite weak there. She was better on abortion, of course. That's a big advantage for the Democrats, and Trump tried, and I think this was smart of him, but he could have done more to point out the remarkable radicalism of Democrats on abortion. The fact that Tim Walz, Harris's vice presidential candidate in Minnesota, uh, removed protections on infants who were born alive during the act of abortion, legally allowing infanticide of children who have been born. And this has happened in Minnesota under his watch. Trump has trouble prosecuting the case about the Democrats' radicalism on abortion and other issues because he makes a lot of wild and crazy sounding claims, not all of which are true. And when you do that, it becomes more difficult to credibly speak to the genuine radicalism of your opponents. So yes, I think the debate clearly a win for Harris, as Ryan Zickgraf reported in our pages. But especially in the early portion, I give Trump the advantage on the economy, and so I think this certainly have less of an effect than the epical debate we saw against Trump and Biden.
Yeah, I agree about, and I think you're right, Matthew, in the sense that the entire chorus of punditry argued that the first 10 minutes were the best for Trump, and those were the economic debates at the beginning. And you mentioned Kamala's appeal to professorial expertise, but she did something even worse to my mind in that portion, which is the appeal to Goldman Sachs. Famously
Yes,
beloved,
thank you for mentioning that.
famously beloved firm, as I said on Twitter, that people just love to hear about Goldman Sachs approving of you. And I think to tie your comments together with Geoff's, this is the difficulty that Kamala finds herself in, and partly it's a result of her not being able to just take a very strong stance either way, is that on the one hand, she represents an administration that has made certain post-neoliberal, post-Clintonian strides for the Democratic Party. It's been a very progressive administration on labor issues, for example. It's gone further than Trump on actually protectionism against China, and in the sense that it has widened the tariffs that Trump put in place. It's tried to do industrial policy. It's tried to use export controls essentially to extinguish or suffocate or at least slow down China's progress on semiconductors and so on. These are all very kind of populist things that the Biden administration has done, and she can't quite articulate them that way. And I don't know why, whether because she doesn't care about political economy, and at the same time, because she's trying to be, you know, she's been told that you have to pivot to the center and you have to capture the center. For her, that means like, well, Dick Cheney, murderer of Iraqi children, and Goldman Sachs are behind me. That's completely unappealing. And I really thought there was a missed opportunity for Trump, because she listed off like all these establishment Republicans who are against him, and I think he did have a good line. He said, "Well, I fired all those people." But he could have gone further and said, Dick Cheney took us to Iraq. Dick Cheney, uh, you know, gave birth to 1,001 disasters in the Middle East. So, I mean, I think that's the trouble with the triangulation that that Geoff, I think, with that strategy that Geoff described is, center means all the good establishment people, all the good and the just, like Goldman Sachs and Dick Cheney are behind me, rather than, we've pursued the new center in the form of, the CHIPS Act and tariffs, and sort of trying to outflank him on those fronts. And then she also, I mean, again, Trump could have pressed her on this and did a little bit, but not nearly enough, is that she sort of disavowed tariffs as a tax on consumers. And, obviously the Biden administration maintains pretty tough tariffs. So how she, so she's torn between, like, basically a part of the Democratic donor class and all these Obamian advisors that she has in her corner who've told her tariffs are bad, attack tariffs, and the Biden administration's own record, and then the desire to appeal to, like, affluent suburbanites with Dick Cheney. It all is just, it doesn't land right. And I again, I concede, and I said right away last night, I was like, she won the debate. Like, he just had, he was baited easily. He seemed defensive. He seemed old in places, but nevertheless, she can't quite land right as a vision for the country beyond, like, well, I'm younger. Let's move on. Let's turn the page. Well, for a lot of people, what do you mean turn the page? Like, things are going really badly. Like, it's not just about, like, being optimistic in spirit. You have to have a vision. She can't quite bring that home yet, and she has very little time in which to do that. And if she's going to be shy again with the press, I really do think then she's headed for disaster, notwithstanding the outcome of this debate.
The auto bloodbath came back. She didn't. Kamala, said that Trump had warned of a bloodbath if he loses the election. I wrote about that for us at the time. It has since become a kind of element of the blue anon imaginary that Trump said there would be a bloodbath if he watched the election. This was at a rally in Ohio, and I'll just say that I'm probably one of the only people who's written on this who watched the rally live and didn't have his perception of it uh, formed by a partisan media response, and then go back and watch the clip out of context, but just watched it from the whole thing from beginning to end as it was occurring. Trump said there would be a bloodbath if he lost, and he was referring to uh, cars being made by Chinese companies in Mexican factories and then imported into America, thus getting around tariffs on Chinese vehicles. Uh, and I just mention that because one of the things that was vexing about the debates, and a lot of conservative commentators pointed this out, was the moderators fact checking. And it fell heavy on Trump and not on Harris. The framing of the questions, I think, clearly reflected the liberal tendency of our mainstream media institutions. This isn't news; it's no big surprise, and commenting on it seems tediously boring. But the questioning Trump, do you want Ukraine to win? Well, yeah, that's just a very clear acceptance of a Trump critical frame, and there was really no similar pressure placed on Kamala. Uh, it's kind of just shows the way in which these debates are outmoded. They worked better for an age in which there was this kind of Walter Cronkite type consensus, and the media tried to play it more down the middle. But the kind of emergency uh, attitude that media organizations have taken to the rise of Trump, and the kind of slow displacement of reporting by fact checking, and an effort to inform the electorate by an effort to combat disinformation. All these things have changed the nature of media institutions, and it's not clear that the debate as we've known it can really survive these changes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a discussion in Daniel Borsten's classic book, The Image, of which is written shortly after the first televised debates, which were the first full-length televised debates were between Nixon and Kennedy, famously in 1960. And I think that the debate is a phenomenon. It's a political phenomenon of the televisual age, and I think part of what we're seeing is just John Askinus wrote something short for us about the fact that Trump skips the Republican primary debate. And this year, obviously, there was an extremely consequential and very bizarre and unexpectedly impactful debate, between Biden and Trump, which really did shift things. But it seems that the era of the debate more broadly is kind of gradually coming to a close, and it's a little bit hard to figure out exactly when and how that will happen. But as Matthew said, I think the part of how you're seeing that is through the shifting role of moderation, where clearly when you have a figure like Trump who's positioned himself against the media and is thus also perceived by the media as a hostile entity, it changes the nature of the spectacle. And but I think all of that is also symptomatic of the way that the era of television is kind of sputtering to an end. And this debate we had earlier this year, obviously a huge event. On this particular debate, it's unclear whether there will be more, right? We're still not sure if there's going to be another debate between these two candidates. So, yeah, there is something about just like this form having reached its limit and in various ways seeming to come to a close. And, I think Trump's kind of, idiosyncratic performance, which is kind of indistinguishable from his other modes of self-presentation. I mean, that's sort of what's part of what's kind of interesting here is like when he's on the debate stage, he's basically doing the same shtick that he does, at campaign events. That he's essentially doing the same thing he does on Truth Social. Like there's no real he's just a kind of a permanent shtick that you just plop him down and he does the same thing in any context. So he's like, part of what you saw with Harris was somebody who was still behaving, not only in the way that I pointed out before, that she's kind of reviving this style of proposal that you associate with the kind of Clintonian triangulator of the 90s, but also that she's she's attempting to approach this as a debate in the way that politicians did for many decades. It's a particular kind of performance that you have to put in, that you're expected to put in. And something else that's notable about Trump as a figure who kind of is symptomatic of the breakdown of this form is just that, like, he didn't really approach it that way at all, right? I mean, apparently they did plenty of prep, but it didn't really show, right? He basically just said the same shit he would have said in any context, without too much regard even for what the questions had been. The main difference being that because somebody else could speak, he had the opportunity to be provoked, and therefore, and was easily provoked. So, I think it's interesting to just see this, as perhaps a sort of late manifestation of this kind of dying form of politics.
Yeah, and yet what do we replace it with? Is it just going to be like TikTok videos? It's a tragedy. One should acknowledge that the loss of certain forms are tragic, because I think there's something about mass media of the kind that took hold, beginning in the 19th century and arguably reached its zenith in the mid 20th century, that goes hand in hand with with democracy. as it's been practiced in the United States. And I'm not sure. Yeah, no, not to get into a Luddite kind of lament, but I'm not sure that what the likes of Elon Musk would replace it with, and they're very eager to destroy the existing press, which couldn't resist showcasing all its flaws and shortcomings with that ridiculous ABC model of fact checking. So there's no denying that being a problem, but still, it fulfills functions that I just don't see any replacements for, and that just this ability to like work off of the same text at least, rather than everyone being in their own silos and dealing with sort of an algorithm that gives you ever more of what you already think you believe and want and need. I think that's a problem for democracy, for mass politics as such. But yeah, I just want to say a word about the moderation. I mean, it's just so unfair. But when people on the right complain about it, you can't help but sound boring, as Matthew said, and yet you can't complain about it. You can't but want to complain about it. I mean, another one that's just a massive whopper that are allowed her to get away with is the fact that she has flip flopped on fracking. Like she is. There's just footage you can find from the 2020 primary season where she says, I absolutely would ban fracking," and now she's like, "I never said I would ban fracking." And fine, let her. If you're gonna let her get away with that, then you gotta stop calling him out so rigorously as well, or call both of them out rigorously. But the way the fracking thing was just so shameful. I thought the fact that they let her get away with that, but then so immediately sort of and severely punishing him for his admitted real whoppers, and some one of which was really grotesque and dangerous, the one where he insists that he won in 2020. So fair enough, call him on that. But then how does she get away with all these whoppers? You tell me.
Kamala, she. I don't think it is convincing to say that she's some kind of convinced communist or hardcore liberal. She has said a lot of very liberal things. Ban fracking, uh, transgender surgeries for migrants, all of this stuff that is just uh, totally out of the solar system. But there's no real conviction there. And so, what does she stand for? What does this candidate represent? I think she does represent something real, and that's basically the rule of the Democratic Party. And if you vote for her, you're going to get that party, and its internal debates will be hashed out, and Kamala will work to enact the priorities that prevail. It isn't clear to me that she will intervene very aggressively in those debates. It's not clear how. She may on certain issues if she becomes president. That would be very natural, but I'm not clear where she would intervene and how. Uh, she had a past as a smart on crime prosecutor, as she put it, but then she uh, tweeted out support for Minnesota bail fund, something that Trump said and Kamala denied, and the fact checkers didn't address, which is fine. They just shouldn't address anything. They should probably just let the candidates talk. So she, I think that's how you have to understand this candidate. Just if you think that the best this country can do at this time is continued rule from the Democratic Party, go with her. People have a pretty good sense of what the Democratic Party is, what its parts consist of, and you can go with that. Trump actually does have a distinctive political vision that he's advocated from the very beginning of his public career to today, and that has been America is getting screwed and we need to get a better, fairer deal. And he's said that about trade. He's said that about foreign policy spending. From 2016 today, he has been very clear that we need a more restrictive immigration approach to immigration. And so the Trump proposition is pretty clear, and he's extremely flexible and pragmatic on other issues. In 2016, he emerged as a baby Christian, as some evangelical leaders put it. He became our most pro-life president. All these changes, but there has been a very definite through line. And so I think that's really what the election comes down to. If you want, Democratic Party rule and you think that's best, just go with Kamala. Her indistinctness is an advantage in this way. She just represents the party and its interests. And Trump will give you a continued reorientation on immigration and trade. Anyway, I don't know. Am I missing something? Is there a kind of distinct Kamala proposition as separate from her party?
I was just going to raise the foreign policy aspect of the debate, which did draw some contrasts, and I don't think that this differentiate. I think this confirms your prior point, right? That I think Harris posited herself as somebody who would represent continuity with, essentially the kind of bipartisan project of American global hegemony, and would, basically, that she, I think, included some words of sort of glorification of NATO. She spoke very solemnly about America's role in, helping Ukraine fight off the Russian invasion, and she basically, and this is, I'd say, an area where her continuity and her willingness to avow her continuity with the Biden administration's foreign policy was most uh, was most obvious. Um, and here I'd say even more so than representing the the Democratic Party per se, she was really positing herself as representing the bipartisan foreign policy apparatus, right? Um, with which Trump has had various conflicts, even though at the same time, as president, he wasn't able to, he was able to kind of carve out a distinct path on certain points, but he wasn't really able to, in practice, entirely, resist or avoid the influence of this apparatus, right? So, notably, he, despite now and in the debate and more broadly being the one who is advocating for peace in Ukraine, right, and claiming that he will be able to bring that about. While he was in the Oval Office, he did provide weapons to Ukraine, and thus, was part of the larger history of, or contributed to the larger history of escalation that led to the invasion, as Thomas Fazzi and various people have written about in the pages of Compact. So, I think he's sort of, and Christian Parenti's piece on Trump's, I think, which is called "Trump's Real Crime Was Opposing Empire." I think he did, in various ways, kind of chaotically break with the priorities of this foreign policy apparatus. And in the debate, I think he did emphasize the need for peace talks. He did claim he would be able to bring about peace in Ukraine, and Kamala very clearly represented the views and priorities of the again the Washington foreign policy apparatus, and didn't offer any divergence from the Biden administration's foreign policy, as far as I could tell. So that seemed like a very clear place in which she was positing herself as the figure of continuity. If you like, how things have been going, then I guess that's in effect what you're voting for. Um, and Trump did, even if not entirely effectively, I would argue, he did present himself as the candidate of a sort of rupture of a more kind of maverick approach, that would, he claimed to be able to bring about peace, and he did bring up this claim. Well, none of these things would have happened if I had been in office. That there may be some truth to that. It's a counterfactual. I'd say his record is somewhat mixed. There were ways in which he broke with this set of priorities, and ways in which he was unable or unwilling to do that. But this was a clear contrast that came out of the discussion.
It's worth noting that Trump, I always find this bit of history sort of occluded by general media amnesia, including media amnesia specifically motivated by anti-Trump animus, namely the fact that Trump was the president who actually gave javelins and other lethal aid to Kiev, which Obama consistently refused to do because he was in his retrenchment mode. And so, I remember the Republican complaint about Obama, or the kind of conventional hawkish Republican complaint about Obama, was that, he's only giving the Ukrainians night vision goggles and MREs, which are these ready to eat meals soldiers use, and blankets, and not lethal weapons. And actually, it was Trump who came in and gave lethal. I mean, he was one of the ways that he, I think, completely defied the idea that Trump was a Russian tool, is the fact that he began to he opened the flow of serious weapons to Kiev before the 2022 invasion. And again, I felt like that could have been something that the moderators could have fact checked, something, one damn fact check in his favor.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the moderators and saying you could have at least fact checked Kamala once or done one in Trump's favor, it does drive home the way in which the debate has become more like a sporting event, where if you are a fan of a team in any sport, complaining about the refs is just one of the most time honored and essential practices of any sports fan. And they were just look at all the flags they were throwing. Just let them play. Or which side were you on? Really seems that's what the debate is. It's a sporting contest, and that's why we need to complain about and work the refs. And certainly, liberals have done a good job of working the refs by talking about Trump's false statements, which are easy to identify. But of course, there are false statements on the other side. And with that, thanks, Geoff. Thanks, Sohrab. Thank you, listeners. Go to compactmag.com/subscribe. Read Ryan Zickraft's write-up of the debate and everything else we have. We have a new Substack coming out from Sohrab Ahmari. So check out our Substack as well for our most exclusive content.